like to give a special thanks to Magic X Beats, produced this track, Proclaim Your Nationality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance, Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance.
Thank you for tuning in to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including Land of the Free, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. And before we begin, I also would like to keep you abreast that we are still on for our first social and economic conference in Durham, North Carolina for January 2022. It's going to be awesome. I'm proud to announce that we have all of our speakers lined up. There will be 5 topics that will be addressed at the conference. So I'm excited about that. So it's definitely going to be a treat. You're all invited, and we'll give you more details as far as the exact date, time, and venue as details progress. So with that, I'd like to get into the show topic of today. And today's topic is the 14th Amendment was never for you. The 14th Amendment was never for you. And this may be a little controversial because I know that there's a lot of people who believe that the 14th Amendment was supposed to help Black people, African Americans, those identified as such. And I'm going to show and prove on this show that that could not be further from the truth. And yeah, it just is what it is. But it's important that this thing be revealed because we have to wake up from the illusion that's been given to us by others so that we can truly get back and be self-determined as a people. So we're no longer falling for the okie doke. And this is inspired by a recent article that came out about a particular man, actually, I believe in North Carolina, who was awarded $10 million, who said he was fired because he was, quote unquote, a white male. Hard to believe, right? But it's a fact. It sounds laughable, don't it? But we're actually going to get into that. And what I like to do to start off, because I always want to give context, this has actually been talked about for years before. This is not a new thought about the 14th Amendment. So what I like to do is actually go into an article from the Moorish Guide. As many of you who have been following me, and I thank all of my supporters and those who continue to listen, you know that from time to time, I go into these articles from this particular newspaper called the Moorish Guide, which was a newspaper that was out in the 1920s and 30s. And it was actually put out by a man by the name of Noble Drew Ali, who was born in North Carolina. And he was teaching people about the importance of nationality. So, and he started an organization known as the Moorish Science Temple of America, and where his members affectionately refer to him as Prophet Noble Drew Ali. So this particular article is entitled "A Divine Warning by the Prophet for the Nations." And I'm not going to read all of it because it's a long editorial, but I'm going to read the part that speaks about the 14th and 15th Amendment. to give some context. It says the following. The 14th and 15th Amendments brought the North and South in unit, placing the Southerners, who were at that time without power, with the constitutional body of power. And at that time, 1865, the free national constitutional law that was in force since 1774 declared all men equal and free. And if all men are declared by the free national constitution to be free and equal, since that constitution has never been changed, there is no need for the application of the 14th and 15th Amendments for the salvation of our people and citizens. And so I'll stop right there. And also to bring some more clarity, in 1774, there actually was a constitutional body of law that existed before the Constitution we know now as the Constitution of the United States. That body of law was known as the Articles of Association. So when he's referring to the Constitution, the Free National Constitution, constitutional law, I should say, Free National Constitutional Law that was enforced since 1774, he is referring from that particular body of law going back to the Articles of Association, okay, when the government of the United States of America was operating under the Continental Congress, which a lot of people don't, know. They don't really speak about that. They think about the later government. But we're going to get into this whole aspect, dispelling the myth about the 14th Amendment applying to people who are classified as Negro, Black, Colored, and African American. Right after this break, we're going to take a brief pause for the cause. But when we come back, we will continue our discussion. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. You are tuned into WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. We'll be right back after the break.
I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I'm an everlasting spirit personality, man. Sooner control elements whenever I balance my span. Nationality is precious for your national redemption. We come out of the dead sands gathered up at the entrance. Newcastle lit Political District #1 and for the Vienna Convention, the treaty up on these punks. According to the 805 Illinois Compound Statute, the Religious Corporation Act. If you don't know, you lack truth. The statute created the Morbid Science Temple charted that Shuali still issues by his signature. He brought us accepted a straw man for value, therefore he redeemed mine. Talking about the corpus so being conveyed, the lean dies. Prophet was billion ladies. Microdot, archangel, devils notice, there was notice. They received a low grade blow, and then the beast had no understanding. The revelation spewed water at humanity. Amarast is the statement. I never would have thought it would be this way to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. Standing here, looking at my Moorish flag. Old glory, no story. Into the ground, it goes back into the old northwest and southwest and makes some territory. No such thing as U.S. citizen, historical enforcement. Though everything is voluntary, though. You're suffering by the buck and resolutions you don't dare to know. I'm rapping while I'm here to verify. 13, 14, 15, the amendment was never ratified. To my black people, where your free national name was at? Cause attached with that, seemed like your own mental brain was snatched. Like Malcolm X told you many times, where was your heritage? Pick up a book and put down the alcoholic beverages, but don't stop it all at once. You get internally damaged, example, your lungs and kidneys while growing up on campus. It's time to get back to the national affairs of men. I'm talking business, watch by action, with self-accredited. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, but not a U.S. citizen. My life's embarrassing enough, it's my political status. In order to evolve, members should conduct themselves by the Constitution and bylaws. Act 6 is to proclaim no bourgeoisie pointed to by an amendment. Shoot is where I've been appointed to. The language of the 805 is key to the 1099. So just get behind the profit and corporation design, cause this time is long. I never would have thought it would be this way to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance, Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance, Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance, Europeans.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including What is the Higher Self, which you can purchase on my website, shemel.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. And if you're just tuning in, we are discussing about the 14th Amendment. The title of the show is The 14th Amendment Was Never For You. The 14th Amendment was never for you. Okay? And if you're just tuning in, I had mentioned earlier that this particular episode is inspired by an article about a man in North Carolina who was fired, and he was awarded $10 million by a federal court, and he claimed that he was fired because he was, quote unquote, a white male. So I will go to the article. The article is in NBC News. It's a recent article you can pull up. And the title of this online article is the following: Jury awards $10 million to former exec who said he was fired because he is white male. Okay, and I'll read the article. It says the following: a man who alleged in a lawsuit that he was fired from a hospital system because he is a white man has been awarded a $10 million verdict by a North Carolina jury, according to court documents. David Duvall of Michigan sued Nationality Health, Inc. in 2019 after he was fired as Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications the previous year. Duvall said in the suit that he was terminated without cause, quote, as part of an intentional campaign to promote diversity in its management ranks, end quote, and that he was fired due to sex and race. That's interesting. Nationality Health, which is based in Winston-Salem, has denied those allegations. It has said in court filings that he was fired for deficient performance and the delegation of critical duties to subordinates. Quote, we are extremely disappointed in the verdict as we believe it is not supported by the evidence presented at trial, which includes our reason for Mr. Duvall's termination, end quote. A Nationality Health spokesperson said in a statement, quote, we will pursue all legal actions, including appeal, end quote. Duvall, hired in 2013, said he was fired shortly before his 5th anniversary at the company and was replaced by a black woman and a white woman. He argued discrimination in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Luke Largess, Duvall's attorney, told NBC News that the former executive was fired days before his 5th anniversary, when he would be entitled to greater severance. Quote, this message is not to abandon diversity and inclusion, it's to do it legally, end quote, Largess said. A federal jury trial was held this month and the verdict was handed down Tuesday, according to court records. The verdict form, says the jury found that Duvall's race or sex was a motivating factor in determination, according to online federal records. And is the end of that particular article. Now, it's important that we look into Title VII of the code of the, of the Civil Rights Act. of 1964, which was actually signed by Lyndon B. Johnson. And this is interesting because this is the result of the civil rights movement that was pushed and led by people who had been identified as Negro, Black, and colored at the time. So when we get into that particular title, I should say Title 7, that's actually codified in the U.S. Code 42 U.S. Code Section 2000E2, dealing with unlawful employment practices. So it actually says, in terms of employer practices, and I'll read it. It says, it shall be an unlawful employment practice for an employer to fail or refuse to hire or to discharge any individual or otherwise to discriminate against any individual with respect to his compensation, terms, conditions, or privilege of employment because of such such individuals' race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, or to limit, segregate, or classify his employees or applicants for employment in any way which would deprive or tend to deprive any individual of employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect his status as an employee because of such individuals' race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Now, this, which is in the law, is what David Duvall was able to win that lawsuit on. This same law that was put in on the backs of people who've been identified as Negro, Black, colored, and today African American. So he gets to reap the benefits for the struggles of another people. You feel what I'm saying? So is this for you? Is civil rights really for you? And that's interesting because we get into this conversation about equality, but we don't get into the conversation about justice. And what is happening, as you see, is you will have more and more cases like this where you will have individuals from other groups reaping the benefits after, particularly he classified as a white male, identifies himself as a white male, and he identifies himself with a group that has historically been looked at as the people who have been oppressing the people who fought for these rights. And he gets the irony of it. So we have to really look at this, and we have to really look into the law. And what I'm going to do is actually dive into deeper into how actually this is not a new thing. It's not a new thing at all. It's not a new thing where other groups have been reaping the rewards of the Civil Rights Act, right? Something that has to be voted on every so often for the people who are identified as Negro, Black, colored, and African American to actually get any benefit of it. You're talking every 25 years, being able to get these rights afforded to them. Yet the people who have always have enjoyed these privileges and rights are now using that to their benefit. You catch what I'm saying? When you look at it, where he's arguing not only he's arguing not only race, but he's arguing sex and race, because he was replaced by, quote, a black woman and a white woman, end quote. So basically that that puts into a whole nother aspect of things to look into. It's very interesting. And you're constantly having these things come into play where it looks like at the end of the day, you won't have any more rights that will be effective to you. If you have this going on in 2021, right? And again, to this day, there's still no reparations being given to the people who are identified as Negro, Black, Colored, and African American. Then what does that say about the whole movement? What does that say about the civil rights movement? Now, I know we all, many of us will feel, that it was a noble cause, and it was in many regards, but was it necessary? I just read earlier in the beginning that section from an editorial back in the 1920s in the newspaper in the Moorish Guide that spoke about it not being necessary to apply the 14th and 15th Amendment, right? 14th Amendment dealt with citizenship, identifying who's a citizen, because the ones who were identified as Negro, Black, and Colored were not looked at as being citizens of the United States. And that ties back to Dred Scott. The Dred Scott decision, which was never repealed, and we can get into that a little later. But what I like to do now is take a brief pause for the cause. But when we get back, we will continue our discussion. You are tuned into WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. Don't go anywhere, because we will be right back after the break.
If you want to educate, empower, and inspire our community, we're providing a wonderful opportunity for anyone who feels they can make a positive impact in the lives of others by applying to be an on-air radio personality. To set up an interview, call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770 to apply. This is your chance to step out on faith. This is your chance to get the experience and education that you need in order to launch to the next level of greatness and make a significant difference. WDRB Media is now hiring on-air radio personalities. If this is you, no experience is required, no previous education needed. They do all the training. Call 877-342-7770 to set up your interview today. Calling all business owners, all independent artists, and all nonprofit organizations. If you are in need of radio advertising, we encourage you to call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770. Through their Community Give Back project, there is an entrepreneur foundation that is paying for free radio advertising. That's right, I said free, F-R-E-E, in support of our small business owners, independent artists, and nonprofit organizations. Please call 877-342-7770 in order to receive your free radio advertising today.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including What is the Devil Sometimes Called, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. If you're just tuning in, we are discussing civil rights, the Civil Rights Act, and the 14th Amendment. And the title of this show is entitled The 14th Amendment Was Never For You. So, if you're just coming in and listening, I was speaking about an article on NBC News where a former executive of a company, was awarded $10 million by federal court, and he made the claim that he was fired because he was, quote, a white man, end quote. And he actually used Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prove his case. And so we went into that, exactly what that was, and just speaking on the irony that this was actually to protect other groups of people from the group that he belongs to. In other words, this was the result of the civil rights movement that was led by people who are identified and classified as Negro, Black, colored, and today African American. And also, I mean, a movement where people died or were beaten, put in jail. We all know about Dr. Martin Luther King and you know, his speeches and the march to Washington and various different things. And this is where the Civil Rights Act of 1964 comes from. You know, it was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson, who was president at the time. And it was to protect from the so-called white men, basically, short and sweet. And it's ironic that in 2021, you have a man who identifies himself as a white man who is reaping the benefits from that very same Civil Rights Act. So I wanted actually to get into the aspect of, before we get into, you know, the Civil Rights Movement, because there was actually another Civil Rights Act before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A lot of people don't even know that, and I'm going to get into that. But before I want to get into that, I want to get into the Dred Scott case, because the 14th and 15th Amendment, you know, were not necessary for our people when we look at a lot of things, particularly when we address nationality, which is why I speak about nationality so much, because it was the removal of the nationality that allowed for these things to happen in law. When we look at it from the perspective of law, how they were able to get away with these things, it was the removal of our nationality taken away from us, because nationality determines political status. And when you avoid a political status, you're void of political power and you're void of political remedy, which is why to this day, people who are identified as Negro, Black, colored, and African American have not received reparations, because that's a political form of redress, of remedy. So what I want to do is touch on the Dred Scott case, and people who've been following know I go into the Dred Scott case often. So just to give the background, in the Dred Scott versus Sanford decision in 1857, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the descendants of Africans who were Negroes of the African race who were imported into the United States and sold as slaves were not included nor intended to be included under the word citizen. Okay, so for those who are not familiar with Dred Scott was a slave in the 1800s, and his owner was a officer in the army and would move from state to state. And in one of the states, it was a free state. He could not have slaves in that state. So technically, Dred Scott was identified as a free man at that point. But so he was emancipated at that point. But then they moved back to a slave state, Missouri. And the owner died. So Dred Scott sued for his freedom. And the case he was making was that because he was previously emancipated by the fact that he had moved to this free state, that he should not be considered a slave anymore, particularly after the owner died. And so when you look at the opinion from the Chief Justice, Roger B. Taney, in the Dred Scott decision, he says the following, and this is a quote. The question is simply this: can a Negro whose ancestors were imported into this country and sold as slaves become a member of the political community formed and brought into existence by the Constitution of the United States, and as such become entitled to rights and privileges and immunities guaranteed by that instrument to the citizen? It will be observed that the plea applies to that class of persons only whose ancestors were Negroes of the African race. Okay, then he further goes on to say that these class of persons were, quote, were not, quote, constituent members of this sovereignty, end quote. And he goes on to say, quote, they are not included and were not intended to be included in the word citizens in the Constitution, end quote, right? So he says that on the contrary, they were at the time considered as subordinate and inferior class of beings, a subordinate and inferior class of beings. It also says here in this same Dred Scott decision that they have no rights that a white man is bound to respect. Now think about that, and then think about the article where David Duvall is protesting against him being fired and being replaced by a woman who is identified as Black, according to the article. Okay? So he's basically exerting this statement, like, that Black woman, so-called Black woman, has no rights that I'm bound to respect. In fact, I'm going to use the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prove this point. That's very interesting. Now, there's been people who, you know, I have had conversations with about the Dred Scott case, and they argue vehemently that not only is their position is that not only is the Dred Scott decision invalid, but also that by virtue of the 14th Amendment, which we're going to disprove that in a minute, but also that it's invalid for us to even speak about because it doesn't address anything that is of benefit to us. In other words, we can't even learn anything from it. That's the point I'm making. Like, why y'all keep going about the Dred Scott case? You know, that's not who we are. You know, they were racist, et cetera, et cetera. Forgetting the fact, either not knowing the fact or forgetting the fact that the same Chief Justice, Roger B. Taney, who ruled against Dred Scott, ruled in favor of the inhabitants of Africa who took over the Amistad ship, La Amistad. And I keep mentioning this because it's important for people to know. People don't speak about this. People do not speak about this particular fact that this same justice ruled in favor of a group of people from Africa and said they were not slaves because they were connected with the family of nations. They had a nation that they belonged to. They had a nationality. So I want to go into Justice Daniels' opinion, which was a concurring opinion to Justice B. Taney, to show you how it spoke to nationality and the importance of it. It said, quote, "Now the following are truths which a knowledge of the history of the world and particularly of own country compels us to know that the African Negro race never have been acknowledged as belonging to the family of nations, that as amongst them there never has been known or recognized by the inhabitants of other countries anything partaking of the character of nationality, civil or political polity, that this race has been by all nations of Europe regarded as subjects of capture or purchase, as subjects of commerce or traffic, and that the introduction of that race into every section of this country was not as members of a civil or political society, but as property in the strictest sense of the term. Now that's very important. So why is that important? Because if you don't understand the terms that is used, then you're not going to get what it's saying, because you'll get it from an emotional standpoint. Oh, it's saying our people are, we're property, and we're not property, we're human beings, blah, blah, blah. The sense of the term, what they're overlooking, what a lot of people overlook, is that the term used is Negro. It's a book you can read look up by Richard B. Moore called Negro, the word Negro, Its Origin and Its Evil Use. I'm paraphrasing that, I believe, but that's the name of the title, or the title of the book. So, and in that book, it speaks about how the word Negro came about. Now, when you use the term Negro of the African race, right, which is what Justice Roger B. Taney used, then you're acknowledging that it's a section of this African race called the Negro, right? Like I always say, if you're talking about the hood of the car, you're not talking about the whole car. So when you say the Negroes of the African race, you're not talking about he's not talking about an entire African race. He's talking about a section of the African race identified as Negroes. This term Negro alludes to slavery. It's a created term that was created for the purpose of enslaving the people. It took away the nationality, right? Proof of that is in the Negro law of South Carolina, which tells you the definition of the word Negro, okay? And it's defined as enslaved Africans, right? I've said this from the first episode. So I want you to, I keep drilling that because I want people to really go and look this up and not just take my word for it. Because a lot of times people can just say, oh, he's just making stuff up. No, everything I'm saying, you can look up. You can look up Dred Scott. You can look up the Negro law of South Carolina in 1848. You can look up the Amistad case, right? You can look up all these different things, Christian Black Codes of 1724. You can go to the Black's Law Dictionary. All these things are verified in law. And it's interesting that people in law, some of our, esteemed brothers and sisters who practice law, don't speak on this. So what I'm going to do is address the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Matter of fact, it's March 1st, 1875. Okay. So this particular act was put in way before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then something interesting happened. So one of the things it speaks about, because it ties in with the 14th Amendment. So it's under the U.S. Statutes at Large, volume 18, page 335 in the document. So it says it's an act to protect all citizens in their civil and legal rights. Whereas it is essential to just government, we recognize the equality of all men before the law and hold that it is the duty of the government in its dealings with the people to mete out equal and exact justice to all of whatever nativity, race, color, or persuasion, religious or political, and it being the appropriate object of legislation to enact fundamental principles into law. And then it goes on to say a couple of things, right? Section 2 specifically says that any person who shall violate the foregoing section by denying any citizen except reasons by law applicable to the citizens of every race and color, and regardless of any previous condition of servitude, the full enjoyment of any of the accommodations, advantages, facilities, or privileges in said section enumerated, or by aiding or inciting such denial, shall for every offense forfeit and pay the sum of $500 to the person aggrieved thereby. Okay, and so that act was dealing with, quote, full and equal enjoyment of the accommodations, advantages, facilities, of privileges of inns, public conveyances on land or water, theaters, or other places of public amusement, right? That was in the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Shortly after that, you have the civil rights cases of 1883. So let me read that one for you. There were 5 cases appealed from different circuit courts involving the validity and interpretation of the Civil Rights Act of March 1st, 1875. In each case, a colored person had been denied some accommodation or privilege on account of color. The opinion of the court that the rights which this law attempted to protect were social rather than civil rights, in that the federal government had no jurisdiction over these matters, practically put an end to the effort of the federal government to enforce the guarantees of the 14th Amendment. I want you to think about that. So when it came to enforcing it on behalf of people who are identified at that time as colored, because they said a colored person, right? And really, when you look at the definition of colored means anything that has been painted, stained, varnished, or dyed. It refers to a thing, not a person, not a human being, I should say, because incorporations can be persons, legal persons, and they have what's called color of law. This colored person, right, could not get the protection from the federal government. That's interesting. But yet and still in 2021 now, we have where a man who identifies himself as a white man gets awarded $10 million under Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I should say. So what are we really fighting for? Is this a battle? Are we fighting the right battle? I argue we're not. As a people, we're fighting the wrong battle. And the proof of it is the NBC News article that I read. Obviously, it's not working. The 14th Amendment is not for us. So we're going to conclude in our final segment. But before we do that, we'll take a brief pause for the cause. But after the break, we will continue our discussion. You are tuned in to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. Don't go anywhere, because we will be right back.
You already know what the business is. Check it out.
Hi, everyone. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook at WDRB Media and follow us on Instagram at WDRB Media Radio
for all your updates, informations, and inspiration.
You're listening to WDRB Media, the voice of the community.
If you want to educate, empower, and inspire our community, we're providing a wonderful opportunity for anyone who feels they can make a positive impact in the lives of others by applying to be an on-air radio personality. To set up an interview, Call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770 to apply. This is your chance to step out on faith. This is your chance to get the experience and education that you need in order to launch to the next level of greatness and make a significant difference. WDRB Media is now hiring on-air radio personalities. If this is you, no experience is required, no previous education needed. They do all the training. Call 877-342-7770 to set up your interview today. Calling all business owners, all independent artists, and all nonprofit organizations. If you are in need of radio advertising, we encourage you to call 877-342-7770. That's 877-342-7770. Through their Community Give Back project, there is an entrepreneur foundation that is paying for free radio advertising. That's right, I said free, F-R-E-E, in support of our small business owners, independent artists, and nonprofit organizations. Please call 877-342-7770 in order to receive your free radio advertising today.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app, and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including How Many Days Are in the Circle, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. And if you're just tuning in, we were discussing about the 14th Amendment. And the title of this episode is The 14th Amendment Was Never For You. 14th Amendment never was for you. Was never for you. So basically, we were discussing about in detail the aspect of the Dred Scott case. As for those who've been following me, know I talk a lot about the Dred Scott case. So I was putting it in context with the article that we discussed about the man who was awarded $10 million. He was a former exec of a company, was fired, and he said he was fired because he was a white man. He was replaced by, as according to the article, a black woman and a white woman. And he argued against the case using Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So I was going into Dred Scott case in terms of how it relates to the aspect of citizen and rights, the fact that it said that a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. So we're seeing now where the efforts of the people in the civil rights movement during the 60s, which produced the Civil Rights Act of 1964, are now benefiting the same group of people who were viewed as the ones oppressing the group that wanted the Civil Rights Act to begin with. So that was, just the irony of that. Also, we went into the fact that there was a Civil Rights Act that existed in this country before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There was a Civil Rights Act of 1875. And then shortly after that, there were the Supreme Court cases, titled the Civil Rights Cases of 1883, where there were 5 distinct cases that went up to the Supreme Court where a person who identified as a colored person were discriminated against on the basis of color. And it was determined that these rights that the initial Civil Rights Act were designed or attempted to protect, which was connected to the 14th Amendment to begin with, they viewed it as social rights rather than civil rights, and that the federal government had no jurisdiction over that. It was a state's issue. And that's very interesting because now we see a lot of situations, particularly in cases where young men and women are being murdered by the police and is viewed as racially motivated, where the federal government is basically not getting involved as far as a federal grand jury and things of that nature, because again, it's like there's no jurisdiction. But yet this is all under the 14th Amendment. So that proves that the statement that was made by Noble Drew Ali back in the 1920s about the 14th and 15th Amendment not being necessary, the application of it not being necessary for the salvation of our people, holds true. So just keeping that in mind, and again, going back to Dred Scott case, it actually speaks about nationality. And it's basically said that the Negro has no resemblance of a character of nationality. Nationality by law, according to Black's Law Dictionary, is that quality or character that arises from the fact of one belonging to a nation. It says that the Negro does not belong to the family of nations. That's because the Negro is a created construct that is designated for people who were looked at as property in the strictest sense of the term. When you're identified as a Negro, you're void of a nationality, and nationality determines your political status. Thus, the Negro, the Black, the colored, the African American, all these titles that allude to slavery, they're not getting any reparations. They're not getting any remedy, right? It doesn't serve you. Those of us who still fall under these titles, still identified by these titles that allude to slavery, it's been proven. It's historically proven. It's documented. Again, referred to the Negro Law of South Carolina, 1848, and gives you the definition of the word Negro. So, putting that all into context, is so important that we get back as a collective of people back into our nationality, proclaiming our nationality, because that is the only remedy to that particular madness. I never claim that it's the answer to all our problems, but as it pertains to this issue of what we call civil rights, nationality is our only remedy. Matter of fact, nationality takes us beyond civil rights into human rights. As the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states,